Hi, I'm Emma. Welcome to Reeling and Dealing, a film marketing series talking to industry experts from filmmakers to producers, marketers to distributors, anyone cool and interesting, making an impact on the industry and disrupting movie marketing, exhibition, and distribution. Today, I'm delighted to talk to Kate Gerova of Mustard Studio, a marketing and brand building studio working for the cinema and film sector across audiences, campaigns, and cinema development. I've had the pleasure of working with Kate last year to help bring the documentary Tish by Paul Sung to Scottish audiences. And today we're going to be talking about what drives audiences into cinemas and how to approach audience building. So welcome, Kate. Thank you so much for joining me.
Inviting me, Emma.
I think just to kick off, if you want to give me a little bit of background about your career to date, how you got into film marketing and audience development, and also specifically the work that you do with Mustard.
So I've been in the film industry for over 25 years, and I got into it by accident, I would say, rather than with any kind of purpose. And I think that I'm of a really lucky generation that could do that. I think there's a lot of people that I speak to who are my peers and who sort of fell into film distribution and then suddenly found that they'd chanced upon a sort of industry that could bring together all the kind of strategic business and yet creative thinking at the same time. And so we were really lucky, whereas now I feel that people would have to go and get degrees and they'd have to get, MBAs in sort of film marketing or film something and bring that to them. And we just know everything is sort of highly regulated and you have to be the best. And I don't know, I read about people who have to go through 7 interviews for an entry-level job. So I feel very lucky. And I got into distribution because I was working in short film distribution. And this was back in the day when short film had, you could still buy and sell short films. There was a sort of business model to it, I would say. Yeah. And it was very about helping, emerging directors, filmmakers. And so I got a chance to work with Andrea Arnold right at the start of her career, for example. So obviously there's gifts. But essentially I got into feature film distribution because we saw a film, a friend and I saw it in Edinburgh Film Festival. So it's a nice link to Scotland, yes. This must have been 2002. And we fell in love with it. And it was a film called Rain by Christine Jeffs. And we were like, this is great. This film needs to be released. And nobody wanted to release it. So we released it. And that was my entry. And what that was learning on the job. There's no other way to say it. That you just had to do everything. We were doing from print transport to to the box office returns, to chasing people for payments. So it went from, this is exciting, we're releasing a film, to basically being on the phone and chasing people for bookings and money. And then after that, I joined a film distributor. Then I worked on a film festival. And then I worked for a film exhibitor, Curzon, so a film circuit, before co-launching Mustard Studio in 2020 with Mandy Keane, my business partner.
Amazing. We're coming out of, as everyone knows, pretty turbulent times for exhibition, for pretty much every area of the film industry, but really very much cinemas are suffering or just sort of coming out of the gloom. Everyone sounds very cautiously optimistic, but I think we're not quite bounced back yet. And I know there's a lot of demands for, we need more content, we need different kinds of content. People seem to be struggling to understand what it is audiences are really looking for, or not quite getting it. There's a lot of reboots and a lot of remakes and a lot of franchises and sequels, and yet last year kind of proved that original IP and original stories and smaller stories like Holdovers, they're doing phenomenally well. So I guess where I kind of wanted to start is, since the pandemic and with all the conversation about trying to get audiences back in, who do you see coming back? Who has returned? What is the current makeup of audiences, and who aren't we reaching yet, who should be coming back? And where do you think the challenges are?
Annually, there's the UK Cinema Association conference, and it just happened last month in March. And so Cinema First do a presentation with stats, and that is through Kantar Research. So that is, doing an awful lot of research of people, whether it's kind of surveys, but it's also people keeping diaries. So I think Cinema First sort of stats do feel quite accurate. They feel that they're, quite very well regulated, and it's been going for so long that they have these sort of benchmarks. So according to their stats, 82% of cinema goers have returned. So we're missing 18%. So this was around November 2023 that this it was done. And of the people that hadn't returned from this deck that they put together, it was the older group of cinema goers that still weren't coming back, whereas 16 to 24-year-olds do look as though they've returned to near normal. We're talking about pre-pandemic near
Like
normal.
2019 levels, kind of.
Exactly, 2019 levels. So that deck in particular sort of said, actually, are we doing enough to bring back the older cinema goers who have clearly gotten out of habit of going to the cinema? So it's a habitual thing. And the other thing is that frequency seems to have slightly decreased. So it's not that people aren't going to the cinema. So I'm afraid I've got no sexy headlines, Emma, because people love sexy headlines. It's like cinema's failing, cinema's over.
I want insights, not sexy headlines.
And it's just it's more nuanced than that. It's always more nuanced than that kind of one headline. And the fact is that that if frequency is down and some people are not returning, it's simple. It's how do we increase frequency? What can we do around that to bring audiences in? And actually, another stat that I found quite interesting, again from Cinema First Insights Group, was that 31% had no idea of the upcoming slate, and that in pre-pandemic would have been around 20%. So that is a huge increase of people who have no awareness of the slate. And if you think about the things that have worked phenomenally well in the last year, so with something like Taylor Swift or Beyonce in terms of concert films, everyone knew when they were coming. You couldn't move and not know the date. I mean,
absolutely,
a toddler would have known the date that those things were, and so it's the sense. So I wonder if we're doing enough to communicate.
That's really interesting. Well, it's like Barbenheimer, you couldn't escape it. Even if you had never set foot in a cinema and had no intention to, you knew they were coming and you knew when. But with that in mind, then, do you feel like almost the big tent poles are almost cannibalizing the marketing space? There's so much attention. They have the power to advertise so broadly and extensively that they're almost eating up space for smaller films to get eyeballs. Or is it more distributors are not putting enough out there, and the space does in fact exist for them to communicate? They're just not doing it. They're either not doing it on the right channels or in the right way, or audiences are consuming differently, which is my personal take on it as well. I don't think the way audiences find out about things, to me, is drastically different to 5 years ago, probably.
I agree with you, Emma. I totally agree with you. And again, UKCA panel of young people, by young people I mean under 25, when they spoke about how they find out about films, it was the trailers and trailers in front of other films, and not even trailers on YouTube, trailers by going to the cinema, and bus sides they mentioned.
I find that so interesting.
It's so interesting, and I'm like, where's the
really unexpected?
Me too. Yeah, me too. Yeah, I agree, because I was expecting some kind of magical, mystical, some sort of social media platform that I've probably not heard of yet that's happening somewhere. Only, So I think the power of advertising, I think that there is, media spend doesn't go as far as it used to. That's true. bookings have changed, so people don't book as far as in advance as you used to. So
Yeah,
now distributors are spending their money closer to the release.
yeah.
So again, it's like, people feel like Monkey Man. It's like it came out of nowhere. Well, probably it didn't for like the team behind Monkey Man,
Yeah.
but for
Yeah.
audiences, it came out of nowhere.
I mean, I intensely read about film. I every day I Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, Variety, Vanity Fair, Twitter, and I remember it being mentioned in a byline a year ago, and then nothing, and then suddenly it was all guns blazing, and I suddenly thought, oh, they did no run up. It got mentioned amongst 10 other movies a year ago, and then I didn't even know it was in production. Like, this is a young actor, he's got a huge fan base, he's cool. It's action thriller that's very on point right now. I'd have thought they would really be ramping that up.
I suspect his fan base know about the film, but I mean, we didn't see him, he's not. I haven't seen. I suspect I'm not the target audience, but I haven't seen loads of press with him. And
No.
then you compare it to something like Poor Things, and it feels like Poor Things was
Yeah,
like how they marketed that
yeah.
over months.
Yeah, like the pattern is out the window, and now we're in. There used to be a formula. The formula worked for decades, and now I get the feeling everyone's watching everyone else and being like, "Oh, how are they doing it?" Or we're going to do our thing differently, and everyone's trying to figure out a new formula that we can all stick to, and I don't think it's going to work that way anymore. So it feels like we're in a whole new testing ground. Every
I
distributor's coming at it in a completely different way, and probably everyone's observing everyone else, sort of going, "Oh, nice move. Okay,
I like the idea that our distributors are sidelining other distributors, and I think the film industry is full of competitive analysis. You can't walk,
yeah,
any do any movement without competitive analysis. So I think the distributor studios will be very confident in what they do, even though it might feel sort of formulaic, but they know what they're doing and they do it really well. They do it exceptionally well. And then you've got the sort of indie distributors that have to be a bit more nimble than that.
yeah,
And that's usually about how much spend do we have. So there's no
yeah,
formula, and it's kind of dependent on what they think the film can do. I think what cinemas used to do is perhaps cinemas used to give a more consistent way of telling their audiences what was coming up
yeah,
more in advance. And I think one of the biggest challenges is that we talked about this idea of a personalized experience. Everything's
yeah,
personalized. Your CRM can be personalized. Your AI can help your CRM be personalized because
yeah,
everybody's different. But actually, as marketeers, we know that you tend to have to do marketing in buckets
yeah,
because you can't, there's only so many ways that you can kind of split up the sort of segmentation. Essentially, there's only so much resource or people
yeah,
or money for all of those things. So I just think that they have so much choice, and actually, you do have to be clever with audiences. It's
yeah,
that time of really just putting everybody in buckets and hoping it's going to be okay. I think it is for some films, but for the
yeah,
more specialist films, the films that are going to take a little bit of time for people to discover, I think there
yeah.
has to be something a bit more inventive around that.
I definitely agree. My other thought around, and again, there's a lot of buzz. AI can help you do hyper tailored marketing and super reactive, which again, fantastic. We know it can do these things, but there's also a knowledge gap. Who's trained in this AI?
Well,
Um,
quite.
uh, uh,
Yeah.
because the technology might exist, but you need people to be trained in it. So just the mere fact of AI existing that can do all this stuff, I'm like, sometimes a small cinema, an independent cinema chain, which maybe has 4 members of staff trying to do everything, are they also AI trained to develop tailor-made, reactive,
Yeah.
hyper-responsive
That's
campaigns? I'm like, well, I'm not sure that's still a big knowledge gap and training gap that you know
I think that's really true, and it's a really good point. And one of the things that at Mustard Studio, when we do talk, with some of our clients, some independent cinemas, is actually what we're always striving for is for them to communicate their personality, which is
Yeah.
often a little, is often going to be a bit more unique, bespoke, it's
Yeah.
independent, because we feel, we think if you're a cinema in your community, people come to you that, yes, of course, we know that everything is content driven,
Yeah.
but the emotional connection you have in a cinema, that journey that you have might be
Yeah.
from just a really well written piece of content, whether it's in the newsletter or a nice social,
Yeah.
or a tweet or something, and it just make you stop for a moment and you think, oh, I love that place, and go and buy a
Yeah.
ticket or something. And
Yeah.
I think that with AI, even if you're trained, it's that's personality. There's something kind of,
Human element. Yeah.
yeah, you have to have some sort of texture there, and
Absolutely.
because then otherwise you are just another movie house
Yeah.
putting a film on. And I think the time of that, it was before the pandemic, that you could literally open your doors,
Yeah.
show any, but I think people now
The people
strive
will come.
for
Yeah.
more.
Absolutely. And going back to cinemas having personality, which yes, it's why I definitely know which cinema I go to for which type of film. I have, and I go to my indie pitch house and I can spend hours there and not even see a film. I'll go and take my laptop, I'll have coffee there, whatever. But if I want to go see a blockbuster, it's the biggest IMAX screen I can get my hands on, and I don't want to spend more than £6 because
Sure.
I like it, but I don't care enough to spend £12 on it. But for me, this is something I've observed. I still feel like cinemas aren't actually capitalizing on that personality thing, reminding people that the cinema space is magical, not just the films you're seeing. There's something about that. The venue, your staff, your welcome, your bar, the reason people want to hang out there, and I feel that's a story not being told enough that cinemas could capitalize on more. That's an
I think
observation.
so. I do think cinemas are getting better at that. But what I would say is that, again, a lot of the work that we do at Mustard is asking the cinemas to look at what their culture is that people work in. So so it's something very kind of almost old fashioned, in the sense that it's not a data driven. I don't have a data driven answer for this.
No, no,
Answer is about kind of culture and values, why you exist, who your
yeah,
people are. And I do believe, again, since 2020, I know that people have had to be paid better. They were paid pretty poorly before. So it's a market correction, which has
yeah,
also impacted on cinemas, of course, alongside other things like utility bills.
yeah,
Looking after your people, it's just not rocket science, right? When you walk into somewhere, if people are happy, that state of happiness is going to infect the people that are walking through the door. That is for your own home or for any
absolutely,
institution or organization, and it absolutely applies to a cinema experience as
yeah,
well. People can watch terrible film but still have a great experience in your venue and will
yeah,
come back to your venue. But if they watch a great film but don't have a great experience, it will definitely have a memory for them.
yes. And I have a hospitality background, and
There you
it's
go.
absolutely the same with a restaurant. You'll forgive about a poor meal in a restaurant where you're treated like a queen, but you can
Yeah,
have the best meal in the world. If people are snooty towards you, you're not going to set foot there again. It's
yeah, yeah,
very
yeah.
much, and also the cinema's not to blame for the bad movie. The day,
Well, bad movies have to exist, otherwise how would we know that there are good
bad,
movies?
subjectively bad. You know what I mean? Like, just because you don't
Yeah.
like the film, that's not the cinema's fault. Uh,
No,
um,
exactly. And so I think that, I do think customer service it can be different. So for example, it is true that people who are older, I get bored of the sort of age buckets that we put people into,
yeah,
but people who are older might still like that experience
yeah,
of going into a cinema and having an interaction and buying their ticket there and then.
yeah,
At the same time, I've heard younger people, and I'm talking about like 50, I'm talking teens, who maybe because they feel they're shy or they're not, they quite like going to a ticket kiosk and not having any
Mm.
interaction and just
Yeah,
being able to go into the kiosk, know where they're going,
yeah,
get the ticket and go through it without any fuss and without even having to speak to anybody.
yeah, yeah,
But then it comes back to, so it's not that I think one is bad or the other. For me, it's about the kind of the flex, the personalization.
yeah,
If for any of us who know people who are neurodiverse, is that journey as they go into a cinema can often be very overwhelming. So of
yeah,
course, but it's about making sure that your environment is about thinking these things through, isn't it,
yeah,
really?
yeah, absolutely. And in terms of going back to the sort of audiences and why are they coming back, why are they not? What maybe you could talk about recent work you've done with Mustard, or just how do you then approach that sort of figuring out, what's going to drive someone to see this film? What's your approach? Where do you begin that process when a
I
film
think,
comes along?
well, I think if you're in a cinema, if you're working for a cinema, you should have the data to
Yeah,
be able to kind of cross-reference the data. And if you were doing an audience acquisition project, that would be slightly different. You would do, I mean, I'm a big believer in research. So I launched a student membership, for example. This was, pre-pandemic, but we did quite a lot of research into sort of different behavior, what was
yeah,
motivational before we launched the membership. So if you're a cinema, you should be using your data. I think there's a lot of data out there on linked to POS systems. People can feel overwhelmed with data. I get that. So maybe you kind of choose 3 entry points and look at that. If you're a distributor, I think there's an awful lot of agencies out there to help you if you can have access to that. So you'll have digital audiences, so you will look across all those social platforms
yeah,
and see that. But if I'm just after a whole new audience, um, which is it's tough. There's sort of grassroots and outreach is definitely takes time. And Emma, you and I think know this from the work we've done. We worked on Tish together and we saw that, and we were, it's not just about contacting people and hoping for the best, and you send them some assets, as we know that's something that
yeah,
we can always do. But it's about, sometimes I think it's about taking cinema to the audience first rather than getting the audience to the cinema first.
yeah,
So I think it's like, where they say with marketing is you give, and then you ask for something.
yeah,
I think it's a bit like there are people who can't go to the cinema, and certainly I work across independent films, and
yeah,
with independent films, probably the show times will be 2 p.m. and 8:30 p.m.
yeah,
It's not
yeah,
like they're, so you're having to be really specific. Can you go to this film at 8:30 p.m.? So
yeah,
after that will start at 9 p.m. So you'll be home at 11. Have you got a babassitter?
yeah,
There's
yeah, yeah. Does
a
your
whole,
bus
here's
run
your
that late?
checklist.
Like literally, yeah,
Yeah. So, so I think that if you really want to engage a new audience, it's like, okay, doing the grassroots, doing the outreach, it's like, where do you want to see some films? Is there a local community centre?
yeah,
Let's have some films, let's have a talk. You choose some films. What would you like to see? What's the interest here? And that you have to build that up, of course. And that takes time to build up. So there's no quick, even if you have money, cash, if you have like a brand partner to throw at something,
yeah.
I that doesn't necessarily increase the sort of longevity. It can be a
No,
one-off, a very successful one-off, but it
yeah,
doesn't mean that it's continual grassroots. I also think that for a long time the cinema industry feels like they're the gatekeepers,
yeah,
whereas now I think that audiences are actually curators of their own, what
yes,
they want to see, because they have so much access to other
yeah,
things.
yeah,
There's lots of companies out there that are doing amazing things, from Letterboxd and Mubi. It's like, discover these, learn about these
yes,
people and stuff.
yeah,
And actually cinemas perhaps need to engage audiences a bit differently.
Yeah. Which it was literally going to be my next question is like, what could cinemas be doing more, or what could they be shifting towards to sort of try? Because to me, the audience holds all the cards now, whereas before, I think marketing was not. I'm generalizing massively here, but it was very much the audience was a passive receiver of marketing, and now the audience is actually dictating which direction a piece of marketing is going to go potentially. They're telling you daily, and they have the voice now because they've got all these platforms. They can tell you what they think on very publicly, and they're making up their own. They're taking your IP and doing whatever they want with it. Whether that's legal or not is another debate. But the point is, they have so much more agency than they used to, and so marketing is like a two-way, very much a conversation rather than a directional, you know, one-way street.
You will act like this, yeah.
Yeah, you will like this because we will show you 5 cuts of this trailer, and we've decided you're in
Yeah.
this group. What would you say are maybe 2 or 3 things cinemas could be thinking about more or experimenting with in terms of either re-engaging that crowd that might not be returning, that older audience, or maybe even approaching how they do marketing differently? I know, again, this is very general. I know every cinema is case by case, but are there some general sort of trends you're seeing of things they could be doing more or less of?
Well, I do think, a lot, I'm bound to say this, but with a lot of the cinemas that we work with, they are really full of very talented and smart people. So often I think it comes down to resource, if I'm honest.
Yeah,
You have some really good examples. So say somewhere like the Barbican, and the Barbican cinema in London is in the, sort of the Barbican
yeah,
estate. So the cinema
wonderful cinema.
itself, or, is surrounded by apartments
Yeah,
and flats. And what they do, for example, is they do a lot of local marketing.
yeah,
They do, they might do kind of subsidized tickets at certain
yeah,
times of the day, and they also have a young programmers group. So they feel very inclusive
yeah,
in terms of bringing people in, to see things, and and I think that they show, new release, quite mainstream films, but they also find the ways to show really kind of hidden gems or
nice,
films that
yeah,
have been screened. So they've got 3 screens. So I think they do that really well, but they're probably, in quite a small catchment area. So they probably
yeah,
can do that, So it's not that other cinemas won't have the sort of thinking to do something like that, but
yeah,
they might have. And then another cinema that we work with, for example, they are about the only cinema in their geographical area, and so for them it's more about like looking at kind of loyalty. So how can we
yeah,
increase frequency of people, and what are we going to give them? It's not just about them giving something to us, is what do
yeah,
so about the kind of exchange, like if part of a loyalty program.
yeah,
And because when you're located and there's not a lot of there's not like a student population, so the population isn't constantly renewing itself,
yeah,
there you're looking at retention and frequency. It's not so much around acquisition,
yeah,
essentially.
yeah,
So each, they're 2 examples of quite different kinds of cinema outfits.
yeah,
And I don't know that there is one thing. I mean, in the pandemic, lots of cinemas stopped doing their magazines for
yeah,
very good reason. Why do you do, a magazine's not particularly green. A magazine costs money. It's sort of paper.
definitely.
There's so many reasons not to do
Yeah,
a magazine. People love cinema magazines. They love getting them, and they love reading about what's coming up. And
yeah,
it's such a nice entry point.
yeah.
How can you say, I think everybody should go back to producing cinema magazines? Because it just doesn't feel like a
No,
very sustainable option.
no. But I think you're right. And again, is that a case of case by case? You really have to look at, will it pay off to keep? I to me, I maybe, because everyone's like, oh, everything should be digital and online. And I'm like, well, should it? Or is that just the assumption because that's the direction globally is going? No, I worked on the French Film Festival and we reduced the number of brochures for exactly all those reasons. And the amount of complaints we got was huge because the older audience, and it predominantly is a slightly older audience, they want their brochure. They don't want to be messing about on the internet trying to find out where they're like, we want our book. I want it in my handbag so I can read it on the bus, or I can read it at the hairdresser. I can sit on a Sunday and go through it and circle all the things I want to see. And so actually the decision was to do a reprint and expand the number we printed because, it was more worth our while putting money into doing that than spending another X amount of hours on the web person to do all sorts of flashy promos on our website.
I think that's such a great example, Emma. I really do. And the thing is, I think because we make these assumptions, it's like, who has the right to film culture? Is it only people who can get on an app?
Yes,
Why
exactly.
can't someone have access to film culture by having their magazine that they read, like you say, in the hairdresser or
Yeah,
on the bus? Because actually, if we really want audiences, then we have to think we can't just put a blanket ban on things that we think, are no longer, that's not
yeah.
cool to print a magazine, you know. But actually, perhaps we just need to, I think you're right. It's like reviewing that.
Yeah, or maybe it's not the big glossy magazine you used to do. Maybe it's just a sort of insert size thing, but it's where can you compromise? And again, it boils down to the most 101 marketing lesson of all listen to your audience. Like they're telling you what they want
There you
all the
go.
time, literally. And
That's the whole name of this
yeah,
conversation. It's just like
there's so
101.
much assumption. I do it. I'm guilty of it. When I saw that stat about audience, but young people looking at trailers and billboards, I fell off my chair because it's drummed into us from morning till night. Oh, Gen Z TikTok, Gen Z TikTok. They don't care. They're all on YouTube. And yes, there's stats that very much indicate that is a pathway. But I'm like, and they're also looking at bus sides, jaw on the floor. And this is the problem we have is blanket assumptions because of, like you said right at the start, sexy headlines. And
Yeah,
sexy
blanket.
headlines are blinding us to doing research or listening to people. I think that's a huge challenge from the marketing side. It's like, I don't want to say getting lazy, but it's almost like there's so much big, loud headlines that we forget to do the fundamental basis of like, yes, but what does my small audience need? You know,
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
end of the day.
I do think there has been one stat that I think is really interesting. I think sort of kind of like wrap up the conversation, and I think both.
Yeah.
Um, I think Picture House and I believe also Curzon have commented on this that they have seen an increase of a younger audience coming to see those art house
Mm,
movies, what I
yeah.
would call art house
Yes.
anyway. So I think the sort of Passengers, Priscilla, so anything sort of
Yeah.
very movie-esque and stuff, which I think has been something I think A24 have really kind of driven this, and I love that.
Yes.
I mean, I but again, I'd be a bit cautious if that's the headline of under 30s only watch
Yeah. Yeah.
movies. But I think that actually fills me with hope. I'm like, yeah, because there is so much kind of wealth of film to discover. And I think that's interesting is that people want to rediscover the film. So
Yeah.
it's not all about new releases, it's also about some of those kind of classics and rep cinema. And I think
Yeah.
that's very exciting because a lot of film culture sits on that, that
Yeah.
work, obviously. We're talking about how heartened we were to feel that young audiences
Yeah.
are discovering and rediscovering classic cinema, and they're coming out for films that might be a bit people might have thought were a bit more kind of challenging,
Yeah.
and again I think it just proves that audiences are very nuanced and that we can't just put labels on any age
No.
group, not the younger, not the older, because
No.
people, if you love film, you love film, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think ending on a positive note.
Yes.
Audiences are there. They're telling
They
you what
are.
you want. Go and listen to them. They do want to go back to the cinemas. They are going back to cinemas. So it is a uh,
Yeah,
positive outlook. And on that, I am gonna wrap this up. So thank you very much for your time.
it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Kate. Bye.
Okay, bye bye.